the protection of clients' data seriously and is conducting an investigation to ensure no personal information was leaked by MSD staff, etc. So that's how it happened. Mm-hmm. We are further illumined. What else can I ask you about?
It's a great word.
A woman faked her own death to collect $800,000 in life insurance. I want to ask you about this, Julia.
Mm-hmm.
Mary Rose Ponce Calderon forged and altered documents posing as another person to claim she was killed by a stray hockey ball. So she's serving 3 years and 2 months in jail, and the sentencing notes have been released, and it's a long story, but to cut it short, the policy was taken out with Asteron Life using her maiden name. The name Sharon Snow was used as the beneficiary, and Snow had the same address and cell phone number. As Sharon Snow, she contacted the insurance company and claimed that Mary Rose Cariopa had died because of a strike to the head in a hockey game. $800,000 deposited into her bank account, just like that, well, with the assistance of forgery and the altering of documents. Why wouldn't a big insurance company hire someone like your good self to check that a person has died?
Well, they do. They don't hire, mate. They used to. I used to work for an insurance company, and I used to do these sorts of things. And there were career fraudsters, and there still are. There's a classic example, and it just shows you how they don't check.
It's interesting that they don't check.
It is, because even on a smaller scale, I had to do a job where a car was meant to be submerged in salt water, very expensive car. So in other words, it was a write-off, and I had to go and look at this car and determine had it been or hadn't it been, and I just did a simple thing like I squeezed the seats and touched my hand to my mouth, and there was no salt. It was fresh water.
And no one had thought of doing that until you came along.
No one had thought of doing it. And so that car had just been, someone put the hose on it, just wanted a new car. Now, this woman went to every insurance company and did a claim like that, but it was very expensive vehicles.
So there's two things I say about it. She eventually got caught because she got greedy. She did the first one, she didn't get caught, did she?
No. And so she went, but this is what they do. But you see, the insurance companies, well, back in my day, did not check between each. They didn't check. When we went and we would say, okay, you're the only insurance company she hasn't targeted, you're going to get targeted now. Do you think they listened? No. Did they get targeted? Yes. But it shows you how you have to check. I mean,
one assumes that perhaps the record of death was forged. I don't know. There were forgeries involved.
Oh, I'm sure there were, but even so, there was history here. You look at, she had history, and that's what you have to go on. That's the best barometer for future behaviour.
She's got in prison, and so she should be, but part of me goes, well, good on you for having crime that you thought through. You know what I mean? Is that the wrong message to be sending to others?
Maybe.
Just could be. Now, this is what you don't want to be talking about, because then you might encourage
I think she should go to prison for it and pay your price. But
had she got away with it, what would you?
No, but it'd still be anti her. But on the other hand, at least she had you
came up with a good plan.
Yeah, exactly. Part of me admires that. Sorry, listeners.
I don't have time really to ask you. I'd like to ask you a very quick question about this, because the calls keep coming here to do a version of this. Kenya has just imposed the world's toughest law against the use of plastic bags. Producing, selling, using plastic bags will risk imprisonment of up to 4 years or fines of $40,000.
So anyone that ever, they get slapped with a 20 cent levy on plastic bags, be thankful you don't live in Kenya. Is my answer to you. That is not mucking around, is it?
That is not mucking around.
That's serious stuff, but they're saving the animals.
Listen, but I mean, wow. We've suddenly gone from zero to very, very anti-plastic bag in Kenya.
Andrew Clay, thank you very much for coming on the panel today. Good luck with the football final.
Cheers.
Julia Hartley-Moore, always lovely to see you too.
Thank you.
That's us. Thanks, everybody. We're back tomorrow. John Campbell now with Checkpoint.
Kia ora everyone, it's all on for young and old tonight. Taina Pora has just won his legal challenge against the government, his lawyer Jonathan Krebs, and the former police officer who first thought this man should not be in prison, Tim McKenna. They both join us live. The election lolly scramble, you asked for policy, you got it in abundance today. Bill English paid parental leave, that sounds familiar, says Labour, who announced an increase to student allowances and more in tertiary education. Winston Peters releases his party list, while spitting tax over the release of details about his superannuation overpayment. Catastrophic rainfall leaves southeastern Texas drowning in floodwaters as more than 30,000 flee their homes, and the black ferns are back in the country.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Bat and tēnei. Taina Pora has won his High Court case challenging the amount of compensation he was paid by the government after he was wrongfully convicted of the 1994 rape and murder of Susan Burdett. Mr Pora asked the court to review the $2.5 million he got for the 19.5 years he spent in jail because it was not adjusted for inflation. The retired High Court judge who considered Mr Pora's compensation claim had recommended the figure take inflation into account, but the government rejected that, saying the original offer was fair. In a judgment released today, Justice Ellis said the Cabinet guidelines do allow for inflation adjustment where it's in the interests of justice to do so. The Justice Minister, Amy Adams, says she'll take time to consider the detailed judgment. The Prime Minister, Bill English, is adamant his ministers didn't leak information about Winston Peters' superannuation overpayment. Mr English says both the Social Development Minister, Anne Tolley, and the State Services Minister, Paula Bennett, acted with integrity after they were briefed by government officials. Sarah Robson has more.
Mr English says it would have been better if Mrs Tolley and Mrs Bennett hadn't been briefed about Mr Peters' situation under the no surprises policy. But he says once they were told, they acted appropriately and didn't pass the information on. Mr English has given assurances the leak didn't come from the Beehive or the National Party. However, Winston Peters says he does not believe Mr English and National's campaign chair Stephen Joyce were not briefed, or that ministers were only told once the matter had been resolved. 3 separate investigations are underway into who might have leaked the information. Ko Sarah Robson, aho.
The National Party leader, Bill English, is defending announcing an extension to paid parental leave during the election campaign after vetoing a similar move last year. National is promising to extend paid parental leave from 18 to 22 weeks if it's re-elected. It would be bought in over 2 years at a cost of $88 million. Last year, as Finance Minister, Mr English used the government's power of financial veto to stop Labour MP Sue Moroney's proposal to extend paid parental leave to 26 weeks, even though her bill had enough votes to get through Parliament.
At the time, we were just making surplus, and it was a large unbudgeted expenditure. And if there's one thing that the national government has avoided, it's large unbudgeted expenditure apart from earthquakes. And so we didn't want to proceed with it on that basis. We always said we'd extend it when we could.
The National Party leader, Bill English. The Labour Party has pledged to boost student allowances and bring forward the introduction of 3 years of free post-secondary education. If elected, it would raise the allowances by $50 a week. It says the 3 years of free education would be introduced in phases: 1 year's education from next year, 2 from 2021 and 3 from 2024. Labour's finance spokesperson Grant Robertson says the staggered rollout makes sense.
We don't want to encourage people to do a year, take a break, come back for another year, so there is a reasonable gap between them coming in, which we think from a behavioural point of view means that people will continue their education.
Grant Robertson says Labour can afford to do this because it would not be implementing National's tax cut plan. National's leader Bill English says students with the highest housing costs will get a $20 a week boost through the accommodation benefit from April next year. And the ACT leader David Seymour says the proposal from Labour is a bribe that sends a terrible message to a generation of New Zealanders. The United Nations has recommended the New Zealand government establish an independent commission of inquiry into the abuse of children and adults with disabilities while in state care from 1950 to 1990. The UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination says it was alarmed by the reports of alleged abuse of children in foster care or state institutions. It acknowledged the government's intention to compensate victims, but says this approach fails to expose the systemic problems that may have existed. It's also concerned Māori children are still more likely to be placed in state care, and the proposal to send young offenders to military-style boot camps. 3 new properties have tested positive to the cattle disease Mycoplasma bovis in the South Island. 2 of the new properties are part of the Van Leeuwen Dairy Group in South Canterbury and are already under restricted place notices under the Biosecurity Act. The 3rd new property is a lifestyle block near Rangiora. It's 5 past 5. To sport, and back from a 15-month drug ban, former world number one Maria Sharapova has won her first Grand Slam tennis match. She's toppled second seed Simona Halep in the first round of the US Open in New York. The 30-year-old Russian was a wildcard entry for the tournament and outlasted Halep in the three-set match, which lasted nearly 3 hours. Sharapova says she kept trying to tell herself her Grand Slam return was just another match.
But this was so much more, and I didn't want to think about it, and you never really know what you're going to feel until you win that match point, and you can't really control your emotions or what goes through your mind, but you just figure that everything that you go through is so worth it just for this moment.
Maria Sharapova. New Zealand's hopes of winning the netball quad series have suffered a telling blow, with vice-captain Maria Tutaia to miss their 2 remaining tests. The 30-year-old goal attack has been released by the Silver Ferns on bereavement leave. Tutaia is replaced in the squad by uncapped shooter Monica Faulkner, a member of the recently crowned World Under-21 Championship winning New Zealand side. New Zealand cricket expects more players to follow black cap Mitchell McClenaghan's lead and opt out of their national contracts in pursuit of T20 riches. The 31-year-old left-arm pace bowler has been released from his New Zealand cricket contract so he can be considered for the new T20 competition in South Africa and this summer's Big Bash League in Australia. That's the news.
Backed by his supporters.
I think we should just leave the poor guy alone. He's not the only one that's ever found himself in that position. And if he wasn't in politics, we wouldn't be bothering about him.
Houston has a problem.
Water started coming in through the door, and my mother said within 10 to 15 minutes it was waist deep. So they had 10 to 15 minutes between entry and waist deep water.
And water bombing.
Fat money! Just got to check if there's any sticks first. Fat money on stick.
Wading in, Morning Report with Susie Ferguson and Guy Espiner, weekdays from 6. Then on 9 to noon, the wave of anti-tourism protests spreading across some of Europe's most popular holiday destinations. And after 10, Te Reo translator Hemi Kelly on his new collaboration with Witi Ihimara, telling the story of an historic battle in 2 languages. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met surface weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula mainly fine today. Rain tomorrow with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms, easing to a few showers from afternoon. Waikato to Taranaki, including Bay of Plenty and Taupō. Cloudy periods with a few afternoon showers today. Cloudy with occasional rain or drizzle tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, fine today but cloudy tomorrow with occasional drizzle. Whanganui to Wellington, including Taihape, cloudy at times with the odd light shower, drizzle developing tonight in Wellington and scattered light rain elsewhere from tomorrow evening. Nelson and Buller, fine spells with a few showers from tomorrow afternoon. Westland, Fiordland and Southland, cloudy periods and isolated showers clearing this afternoon and becoming fine. Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago fine at first but becoming cloudy with occasional drizzle developing this evening. And the Chatham Islands cloudy with periods of rain from this afternoon. It's 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten, and thank you all for joining us. Coming up on the program, Tēnā Pōra has another compensation victory. This one, a very meaningful inflation adjustment. Tim McKinnell and Jonathan Krebs will join us live in the studio shortly. Winston Peters and that superannuation leak. Was it, as he seems to think, from someone in government or connected to it, seeking to attack his reputation and therefore his vote? But let's begin on the campaign trail where National and Labour have gone head-to-head in a policy and spending duel. Bill English has promised an extra 4 weeks paid parental leave, while Jacinda Ardern has been wooing students and their families. Labour's education announcement next, but first, what had been a Labour announcement but is now very much wrapped in blue. National would extend paid parental leave from 18 to 22 weeks and add flexibility, allowing both parents to take some of their leave at the same time. Labour says extra parental leave could already have been available if Bill English hadn't vetoed its planned extension last year. Here's Tracy Neal with the story.
Bill English appeared at ease as he mingled with mums, teachers and toddlers at a preschool in Richmond this morning before announcing National's pitch for the centre ground, a parents and newborns package.
We recognise in particular the contribution of our mothers, many of whom are working, as well as looking after their children. Because we have a strong economy and good government's books, we can continue to extend support to families, help them with their budgets and recognise their contribution to our community.
In the 2014 budget, National extended paid parental leave from 14 weeks to 18 weeks. The new package has 4 key parts, beginning with extending paid parental leave by 2 weeks to 20 weeks in July next year and by another 2 weeks to 22 weeks in 2019. It will also be made more flexible.
Today I'm announcing that the 2 parents will be able to take paid parental leave at the same time. Currently, for instance, if a father wants to be at home in the first few weeks of a newborn's life, they have to take annual leave or unpaid leave.
The package also includes a free course of dental treatment for pregnant women, along with quicker access to fertility treatment and a 3rd free IVF cycle for eligible couples. Nelson, mother of 2, Carmel Layton, says any extension of paid parental leave would be great news.
I think it's fantastic. When I had my first daughter, it was only 14, I think, so it's not a lot of time, not a lot of money. So.
But Labor is crying foul over National's plans because last year, while serving as Finance Minister, Bill English vetoed proposed changes by its MP Sue Moroney to extend paid parental leave to 26 weeks. A similar bill by Ms Moroney in 2015 also failed to pass after both National and ACT blocked it, even though it had been watered down. Ms Moroney says today's announcement is a sign that National has run out of its own ideas.
Just last year, they used all of their might and power in Parliament to stop parents from getting this entitlement, and used never-before-used financial veto on an entire bill to deny parents this measure that would have been in place already if the National Party and Bill English in particular hadn't moved to stop it.
At the time, Mr English said the estimated cost of the legislation, $278 million over 4 years, would be a significant unbudgeted cost to the government. He says the books are now in better shape.
Well, at the time, that was a large unbudgeted expenditure, but we said then that we would extend paid parental leave when we're able to. We're doing that in the context of a range of support for families.
Ms Moroney says Labor still plans to go one better on parental leave if it becomes government.
I'm feeling frustrated on their behalf, but excited that Labor, when it's elected on the 23rd of September in the first 100 days, will be passing a law for 26 weeks paid parental leave.
National's package is expected to cost $88 million a year once it's fully implemented in 2 years' time. In Nelson for Checkpoint, Tracy Neal.
So, National was extending a paid parental leave and Labor was promising to increase students' allowance. Students receiving an allowance would get an extra $50 a week under a Labor government, but critics say the money would be better spent elsewhere. Labor's tertiary education policy also contained a bringing forward of the implementation of its earlier announcement around student fees. Releasing the policy in Auckland this morning, Labor leader Jacinda Ardern said cost was a barrier to education and student allowance increasing would help. Our reporter Siobhan Wilson has more.
Hannah O'Byrne is studying law, politics and international relations at Victoria University. She says if Labor led the next government, its policy would make a huge difference. The money would mean she could live somewhere habitable.
I think there's a difference between having it tough and having it dangerous. Like, my friend Paul has asthma and can't come over to our house because it's too mouldy. So I think we don't really turn the heat on, so we'd still be cold, but I think being damp and sick is not just having it tough, that's a little bit inhumane.
Jacinda Ardern says students don't have enough money to study and live.
The idea that roughly $170 is going to cover your rent just isn't fair. This was a really practical decision. I think when people hear that that's what people were trying to survive on, they'll understand why we've put that extra boost in there.
Ms Ardern believes the country can afford it and it would be money well spent. She says education is a public good and everyone benefits. But the leader of the National Party, Bill English, says Labor would be taxing truck drivers more to pay for more lawyers.
I mean, there's no such thing as free tertiary policy. If they want to have a big spend on students, that's coming out of the pockets of the process workers that I met with this morning at King Salmon. It's coming out of the pockets of the checkout operators I met with last night in Auckland. That's who's paying for it, and we don't think that's fair.
Mr English says students with the highest housing costs will get a $20 a week boost through increases to the accommodation benefit from April next year. Labor has also signalled it will bring forward its policy of 3 years free training. It would be introduced in phases, 1 year's education available from next year, 2 from 2021 and 3 from 2024. Ms Ardern says the scheme is not limited to school leavers.
30% of our school leavers right now are going on to tertiary education. We've actually had higher rates than we have right now. We know cost is a barrier for all New Zealanders. We want to make sure that no matter what workplace you're in, no matter what your parents are doing, they actually do something about those fees for everyone.
The ACT leader, David Seymour, describes the policy as blatant pork barrel election bribery. He says allowing students to borrow more money while studying makes sense, but abolishing fees does not.
The taxpayer already subsidises 70 or 80% of the cost of a degree. You're asked to borrow the remaining 20 or 30% on interest-free terms. That's a pretty good deal.
Mr Seymour argues the money would be better spent elsewhere, for instance on primary and secondary schools. The Māori Party co-leader Marama Fox says Labour's policy is a good start, but could be more generous.
The universal student allowance needs to be adjusted to the cost of living. We need to reinstate the student allowance for postgrad students and write off the living cost component of student loans for those who work for 5 years here, and also free public transport. We need to remove all barriers that prevent our young people gaining tertiary qualification.
Marama Fox says students shouldn't be prohibited from receiving allowances based on their parents' income, and the current system should be reviewed immediately. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko Siobhan Wilson aho.
Just before we move on, Bill English and the police investigation into Todd Barclay. Now, this afternoon, the New Zealand Herald released papers its reporter David Fisher had obtained under the Official Information Act that reportedly show a person acting for Bill English sought to have the contents of his statement to police about Todd Barclay's actions and secretly recording a staff member in his electorate office not made public. Police appear to have initially been prepared to release Mr English's statement to them, but the papers obtained by the Herald suggest they changed their position after concerted approaches from someone reportedly acting on Bill English's behalf. Now, we asked to speak to the Prime Minister about this tonight, but his office declined our invitation. We think this is a matter of considerable public interest, and our invitation to Bill English remains open throughout the program, which is another hour and a quarter long. We will have more politics coming up, including Bill English on, Winston Peters on that superannuation leak. That is before 6 o'clock. Stranded residents in Houston are being urged to hang towels or sheets on the roofs to alert rescuers if they need assistance. Tropical storm Harvey has already brought unprecedented rain to Houston, and forecasters say there is much, much more to come over the next 3 days. It is a big, heavy front, and now it is essentially still above them. Curfews are in place and floodwaters are still rising, forcing more than 30,000 people into shelters. Thousands of others are stranded in their flooded homes. The BBC's James Cook has this report.
Wake up! Wake up! Wake up! In Texas today, every stranger is a friend. Exhausted, unable even to stand, but she's safe. All day long they have struggled to safety, family after family abandoning their homes to the water. Anything that would float became part of this makeshift armada. People here are pulling together, but many say they had no choice. They'd called for help, but no one came.
We've seen a couple of neighbors helping neighbors, or people that had some people come in and with boats, but not enough help.
And none from the authorities?
None from the authorities. The authorities have been basically useless.
And they have been overwhelmed by the scale of this crisis. 3 days after Hurricane Harvey smashed into their state, Texans are still struggling in its wake. In this suburb of Houston, they called for help all night, but no one answered. In the end, it wasn't police or firefighters who came to the rescue, but some friends with a boat.
We just happened to be here, and we had a boat and a truck, so here we are.
And that's what's happening all over Texas, isn't it?
Yes, it is. All over Houston.
And in the cold and the rain, the helping hand was warmly welcomed.
Grateful to actually the whole community, seeing Houston being together, helping each other out. That's really touching. And I was telling my mom yesterday, I wish I actually had something to go out and help. In moments like this, we all need it.
Well, there is frenetic activity here as boats buzz up and down the river. This little vessel alone has rescued 30 people so far, and the situation is developing very quickly. On the rooftops of flooded houses, many more are still waiting to be rescued. In desperation, all they can do is to cling on and call for help. In Houston alone, more than 20 helicopters are flying rescue missions, but pulling people from the floods is delicate and it is dangerous. And as Texas brings in 12,000 soldiers from the National Guard to help, the state also has to prepare for a presidential visit.
It is a historic amount of water in particular. There's never been anything like it. So the people are handling it amazingly well, and the people of Texas, as you know, have really persevered. And when you watch the spirit and the enthusiasm and helping each other, the teamwork, it's really been something.
Texas is now saturated and it is struggling. Thousands of people have made it to safety, but the waters keep on rising and the Lone Star State is swamped.
Yes, it is swamped, and yes, those waters are still rising. That was the BBC's James Cook. There are now concerns that the storm is poised for a second hit. On the same ground in Houston, its centre is lying over the Gulf of Mexico, where it's gaining strength unbelievably and is expected to turn back and head eastwards back up the same coast. Obviously, RNZ News will keep an eye on that. Austin Seth, who lives around 100 km south of Houston, saw a Facebook shout out yesterday morning hoping for boat owners to join in a rescue of trapped and stranded residents. He was one of thousands of volunteers outnumbering the police who've spent the past 24 hours helping people from their flooded homes. It really has been a community effort. I spoke with Austin as he drove home today, his boat on the trailer behind him, and asked him how many people he'd helped rescue.
So yesterday, we went up to Houston and we rescued about 4 families, about 16 people in total, from their houses that have about 7 to 8 foot of water in them. And we were pulling them anywhere from, we pulled a few guys off their rooftops, and we pulled some people out of just chest deep water. They were swimming out of their homes. But we rescued 16 in total yesterday, and then a bunch of their pets. And today I spent most of the day getting the people who are planning on being flooded. Luckily enough, around here, we can see the floods a few days away. The river's flowing up over the land, and we can actually, the news and other weather forecasters have predicted that we're going to be flooding here pretty severely in the next couple of days. So we had a heads up. And so we're trying to get everybody out of the area right now before it gets too bad. But the people in Houston who I was helping yesterday, it happened overnight. I talked to some people that I pulled out, and they said they woke up that morning and stepped out of their bed, and they were in knee-deep water, and it only got worse from there. And but all sorts of different people from all different walks of life, really.
And Austin, how do they react when you turn up in your boat? What do they make of it all?
Oh, man, the emotions were very mixed. For the most part, they were thrilled to see us and someone that could take them back to get dry. Most of them had been wet for hours, and the water was actually relatively cold. And so they were thrilled to see someone to be able to take them out. However, at the same time, they were devastated. They were talking about people who literally just lost everything overnight, driving down the streets in the boat. All the cars are still in the driveways underwater and parked in their garage, floating around in their garage and stuff. And, no one saw it coming. And so they were just devastated, and a bunch of them were in tears. And it was a very emotional time for that part of Houston.
Your accent suggests to me that you were born and raised in this great state. Have you ever seen anything like this before?
Well, nothing like this, no. This is truly a disaster. I've never imagined it could be this bad. we saw some pretty bad flooding last year, actually, what was supposed to be a 100-year flood. And this year they're calling it an 800-year flood. I mean, it's something that happens once in 10 lifetimes kind of thing.
Mm.
And it's unreal. I mean, there's not words to describe some of these neighborhoods and just how suddenly they were devastated.
Austin, there's been some strange, angry stuff happening in the United States, and this kindness of strangers, people looking out for each other and looking after each other, is a wonderful thing to see, isn't it?
Oh, it is. You know, that was probably the best part of the whole thing for me. When I showed up, you know, all the volunteers lining up to help. And you know, one of the most remarkable things was that there was very little, at least the parts of Houston that I was in, there was very little law enforcement coordination, really, because there was probably 10 volunteers to every law enforcement officer, and so they couldn't keep up with the volunteers. And honestly, they didn't have enough law enforcement to cover the entire areas that were being flooded. And so the volunteers really pulled together, and, you know, we kind of came up with our own game plan and set out to do all we could, and you know, made it happen. I mean, I say we, the entire, you know, city of Houston made it happen. It was a joint effort, and we couldn't. I mean, everybody played a role.
Where are you taking people when you get them in your boat? Where do you take them to?
You know, that's a good question. I've had a lot of people ask me that question. So my main priority and the rest of the volunteers' priorities were to get them dry, basically. You know, they'd been in their houses and soaking wet in deep water for hours, and if not the entire day. And so what we did is we all launched on an interstate, actually. The water was deep enough on a major interstate going to Houston. And we launched on the interstate and then navigated our ways back into the neighborhoods. And once we picked someone up, we'd haul them back to, they had kind of an area where they were bringing in buses to shuttle them out to shelters, and also another area where if they had friends or family in the close area or the vicinity that could come pick them up, that they were allowing, you know, civilian traffic to come in and pick up their loved ones and whatnot. So basically the volunteers got them to the dry point, and then either law enforcement or other, you know, family, or there was also other volunteers giving rides to people wherever they needed to go or wherever they wanted to go, as long as they could get there, because a lot of the roads are impassable, or they're not, you can't drive through them because they got water on them. So
Austin, you were driving your boat along the interstate. It's just such a bizarre image, isn't it? Were you sticking to the road rules? Was everyone keeping on the right side of the road in their boats?
Yeah, it was bizarre. You know, when we showed up, they told us, you know, go north on Interstate 45, and you'll see where to launch. And I said, well, is there going to be someone there waving me down? It's like, no, you'll see it. And I said, well, what does that mean? He said, just you'll know it when you see it. I said, okay. And so I started driving, and it got to the point where you couldn't drive anymore, and everybody just kind of stopped there and said, what do we do? I said, well, I guess we'll just go to work. We dropped the boats in, and we're driving down the interstate, so we found a side road that cut into the neighborhoods. And, you know, honestly, we were getting lost back in some of these neighborhoods because a lot of people had never been there before. And so luckily a few of us had GPSs on our boats, and we were able to mark our tracks on the way in and then follow them on the way out, and following street signs when we could see them, but most of them were underwater.
Austin Seth, who had been taking his boat along the interstate, turning into suburbs and subdivisions to save people who really were underwater. Home again. Hundreds of people were at Auckland Airport this morning to welcome the victorious Black Ferns back into the country. Unlike the All Blacks and Team New Zealand, who fly business and first class, the Black Ferns flew home economy, tweeting yesterday their thanks to Emirates for allowing them into the airline's lounge. The women in black say it was overwhelming to see the amount of support after their 41-32 win over the defending English side in the Rugby World Cup final. Jessie Chang was at the airport.
The welcome had all the markings of a great party: drums, music, leis and family and friends. About 500 supporters packed the Auckland Airport Arrivals Hall to greet the victors, including students from Rutherford College and a Cook Island drum group, Te Maru o Toi. They were chanting and singing a waiata before the Black Ferns, who had been flying for more than 24 hours, walked out. Team captain Fia'o Fa'amausili says the welcome was surreal, but less than 48 hours after their World Cup win, it's still sinking in.
I'm just happy that the girls that have come into the side, this is their first World Cup and that they've come away with the cup, so that means everything to me, that I get to see the young girls actually achieving their goals of achieving their first World Cup.
She says she had faith the Black Ferns would come out on top from the first whistle.
The first half was tough, but we made it tough for ourselves, and so that was what was said in the changing rooms, is just play our game, and that's what we went back to. And there's no minutes or seconds in that game that I think that we were going to lose. I was confident that even though England was ahead, that we were going to come away with it.
Ms Fa'amausili says it wasn't just a win for the team, but a win for women's rugby that will no doubt grow because of it. Her sister Etta Jones was waiting eagerly at the airport.
Our family are extremely proud, and I say family, extended, immediate, all of our friends that we call our families and consider our family have been a massive support, are all really, really proud of her and what she's achieved.
For Portia Woodman, who was named the top tournament try scorer, this is her first World Cup title. She says she and her fellow team members didn't have to pay for the World Cup itself, but everything else has come at a significant personal financial cost.
Getting to trainings, paying for gym membership, paying for boots, clothes, sponsorship, all the recovery stuff that we need, it's all on our own hand. And it's like that for an amateur sport to get, as we're getting started. So that's expected, but heading from now, we've got the World Cup for the 5th time. We're looking for some support from someone.
Ms Woodman says her focus is now on the Sevens team leading up to the Commonwealth Games. And whilst Team New Zealand and the America's Cup in its Louis Vuitton case travelled first class on the flight home from Bermuda to Auckland in July, the Black Ferns made do with economy, tweeting last night their thanks to Emirates for allowing them to freshen up in their lounge.
We flew economy, but that's the normal for us, so which is
Hopefully next World Cup will get you first class.
Yeah, hopefully. Maybe even in business will be nice.
Most of the players returned today, but some of the team are still overseas enjoying a holiday. For Checkpoint, Core Jesse Chain TV.
Coming up on Checkpoint, Tainapora has won his legal challenge against the government in the High Court. We will have the details of what this means live in the studio. Winston Peters releases his party list while going for blood over what's been going on with his superannuation overpayment. Nona is here with some breaking news about Veritas. That will be next. But before it all, Katrina Batten with the 5:33 headlines.
Tainapora has won his court case challenging the compensation he was paid after he was wrongfully convicted for the 1992 rape and murder of Susan Burdett. Mr Porter asked the court to review the $2.5 million he received for the 19 and a half years he spent in jail because it was not adjusted for inflation. Winston Peters is accusing National Party ministers of character assassination after details of his superannuation overpayment were made public. The government ministers, who were briefed by officials, deny making it public. Bill English is defending announcing an extension to paid parental leave after previously overruling a similar move. Last year, as Finance Minister, Mr English vetoed Labour MP Sue Moroney's parental leave bill, even though it had had enough votes to get through Parliament. The United Nations has recommended New Zealand set up an independent commission of inquiry into the abuse of children and adults with disabilities in state care. The UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination says it was alarmed by the reports of alleged abuse of children in foster care or state institutions from 1950 to 1990. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade reviewed its travel advisory for Japan today after the latest North Korean missile test. It says tensions could escalate with little warning, and New Zealanders in Japan should monitor developments and follow any alerts and instructions from local officials. And officials in Houston, Texas warn as many as 500,000 people may have to be evacuated, with a river which flows through the city's southwest poised to break its banks in the next few hours. Floodwaters caused by an unprecedented rain from former Hurricane Harvey continue to rise. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6 o'clock.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Let's turn to business news now with Nona Peltier. He was furiously making notes on a document beside me with the title Veritas on the top. What can you tell us, Nona?
Well, the company has been having quite a lot of trouble for a while. It's owned by investment concerns associated with the Mad Butcher.
Right.
So it turned itself into an investment vehicle, and it invested in the Nosh food. It had a...
So for people who don't know Nosh, that's a kind of upmarket deli/supermarket chain.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, and they had a number of... they had bought that. They also owned the Better Bar Company. They bought that as well. There's some good bars in that suite. The ones that were underperforming were based in Hamilton. They sold those, I guess, maybe a year or so ago. But they were...
And the Mad Butcher, they had the Mad Butcher too.
They have the Mad Butcher. They still have that.
Right.
But
Nosh has been a disaster for them, hasn't it? But that's another story.
Nosh has been a disaster, but the Mad Butchers have also been underperforming, and that's partly because of, increased competition from supermarkets and so on. So the whole piece has been difficult. And there was an annual meeting, I guess, a couple of years ago, which was pretty
tense,
fraught, to say the least. It was very angry shareholders at that stage. Now, the share price closed today at 15 cents, so that's well down on what the company originally listed at. Now, the ANZ told Veritas, I guess about a year ago, that they needed to sell those Nosh supermarkets, and they did. But the company that bought it went into receivership and didn't honor some of the contractual arrangements. So the old Nosh, which was owned by Veritas, took the new Nosh to court and won. But the thing is, they received a judgment. However, they're unlikely to ever be paid because the new owners, new owners have gone into receivership.
So what's been announced this afternoon?
This afternoon, the bank, which has been looking after Veritas, that's the ANZ Bank, has said that they are no longer willing to do business with them. And so that's going to leave Veritas in a pretty difficult situation because they do have quite a lot of debt, and they're not making any money. So they made a loss of $793,000 for the year ended in June. That was just announced late this afternoon, and that compares with a loss of $4.6 million the year before.
Right.
So they don't have any.
So their future, in the short term anyway, is imperiled, right?
I would say,
definitely.
So the Mad Butchers, they're going to have to work on it. They say that the Better Bar Company has exceeded its forecast for the year, so that's pretty good. But, that's not going to carry the company. No. They've got a lot of Mad Butcher stores. Let's see. According to this, I was just flicking through my notes. Quite a number.
Yeah.
And some of them are franchised, and some of them are actually owned by the company. But in either case, a lot of work needs to be done to turn those around because there's been some unhappy franchisees. So that's the story with Veritas, unfortunately. And we'll bring you more about that, I guess, tomorrow morning.
Thank you very much, Nona. All of this is breaking as we speak. Building insurance, the cost to insure buildings could rise, this is in my notes, by more than 50% in just 3 months' time. Why?
Well, because the government is increasing the levy for the earthquake damages, and that's going up by about a third, and that's the first $100,000 of your insured value. And as well, last month there was the fire service levy increased by, I think, 40%. So overall, that would have added cost, but not just that. All the damage has been caused by methamphetamine, drug use, and manufacture to buildings has increased insurance levies too.
Some of this in hindsight is looking like hysteria, isn't it? I mean, they close down a building if someone smokes a pipe outside it, don't they?
Apparently. But, there has been some work done in terms of trying to sort out standards for how to test for methamphetamine. So hopefully that will save some building owners some money. Meanwhile, the markets had a pretty poor day, and that's partly because of North Korea firing some missile over Japan. That did not go down well, as you could imagine, and the global markets reacted pretty poorly. The New Zealand Top 50 Index fell more than 1% today, down 89 points to 7,738. The worst of that was Chorus, following on from yesterday. They fell another 8% today. That's 34 cents down to $4.05. So our market was down 1%, 89 points to I just said that, 7,738. The dollar was a touch weaker, 72.3 US cents, 91.1 Australian, and 55.8 pence.
Nona Peltier, keeping us up with what's going on. Thank you so much. Real uncertainty as a result of North Korea firing this ballistic missile really impacted on Asian markets. A statement coming out from J Alert in Japan, the government's emergency agency, sending out a statement to phones across the country. A missile was fired from North Korea. Please evacuate to a sturdy building or basement. No wonder the markets were jittery. I bet people were more so. This report from the BBC.
Japan being woken up by a siren on Tuesday morning as a North Korean missile flew over the country. The rocket was launched from near Pyongyang and it flew over the northern island of Hokkaido before splitting into 3 parts and landing into the sea to the east. It's just the latest in a series of military missile tests conducted by North Korea this year, but a more serious one because it flew over Japan. The last time that happened was nearly 2 decades ago. Their outrageous act of firing a missile over our country is an unprecedented, serious and grave threat, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe said. At a US base near Tokyo, a military drill was conducted by Japanese forces in response to the missile launch. Across the sea in South Korea, joint exercises are underway with American troops. They're held every August, and North Korea usually responds with a show of strength. Last year, it conducted a nuclear test in retaliation. This year, it's flown a missile that had the potential to cause serious harm. A strong message that despite international pressure, Pyongyang has no intention to stop.
That report from the BBC. The UN Security Council will hold an emergency meeting tomorrow over the missile launch. Meanwhile, New Zealand's Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade has reviewed its travel advisory for Japan. It says tensions could escalate with little warning, and New Zealanders in Japan are advised to monitor the media, to stay informed of any developments and follow any alerts and instructions issued by local authorities. As you heard in the intro to that extraordinary story, the Japanese government issues alerts direct to cell phones. Quite a remarkable state of affairs. Remarkable state of affairs at home too. Let's return now to Tainapura. I'm going to switch my cameras because I have 2 guests in the studio who won his court case today, challenging the $2.5 million in compensation he was paid by the government for wrongful imprisonment. Mr. Pora spent more than 2 decades in jail for the 1992 rape and murder of Susan Burdett, which he didn't commit. He asked the court to review his compensation because it was not adjusted for inflation. Mr. Pora's lawyer, Jonathan Krebs, and investigator Tim McKinnell, who really is responsible for setting this whole thing going and getting Tainapura out of jail, join us in the studio now. Thank you both for being here.
Pleasure, John. A couple of things. First of all, there are 2 of our team missing. We've got to acknowledge them. Ingrid Squire, who really wanted to be here but couldn't be, and Jerry McCoy, who's been a marvellous help.
Jerry did good work in court on this case, didn't he?
Well, we both did.
Yes,
we both did. We both did.
Let's talk about what this means. So this was $100,000 a year, which was set in '94, wasn't it? And as we all know, 23 years on, $100,000 is not worth as much as it was in 1994 in terms of spending power.
Correct.
So you said it had to be inflation adjusted, and Justice Ellis has said...
Justice Ellis has said yes, that the Cabinet didn't have the right information before it when it made the decision not to inflation adjust, and has sent it really back for Cabinet to reconsider it. I think it's the fairest way of deciding it. But what we have to remember is that the recommendation that the Cabinet sought from retired Justice Hanson, the opinion that came back from him was that to not inflation adjust would be anomalous and unjust. Would be unfair as between people.
So when Justice Ellis said the Cabinet didn't have the right recommendation before it, what were they working off?
Well, it seems that the advice that was given to the Ministry by Justice Hanson didn't find its way through the Minister's office to Cabinet. And so...
And Justice Ellis is explicit about this. I've had a high-speed read of this, and she's quite explicit. She says, look, it's not the decision that was faulty, it was the advice that was faulty.
It's abundantly clear on the papers.
Yes. So who's responsible for the advice?
Well, I suppose it comes back to the Ministry.
quite extraordinary state of affairs. So what happens now? Does Cabinet have to act on Justice Ellis's recommendations? Will Tana Pora's compensation get an inflation adjustment?
What Cabinet's now required to do is to, if the Minister thinks it's appropriate, Cabinet will need to reconsider it. Of course, the Minister can simply say, we accept that we are wrong and we did have the power to inflation adjust and we're now going to do that, and we agree to do that immediately. I mean, she can do that, and we think that that's what she should do.
Jonathan, I want to come back to you in a moment and talk about what this means as a precedent, because this is the High Court ruling on a Cabinet decision, isn't it? And so this is a big, big thing. But Tim McKinnell, I'm looking at you and I'm thinking none of this would be happening. In fact, Tana Pora would not have probably got parole yet. He would still be in jail were it not for you sitting there thinking to yourself, this guy didn't do it. This is an extraordinary day for you, isn't it?
It is. It's an extraordinary day. It's, you know, there's mixed feelings, to be honest, John. You know, we've had to fight and scrap every step of the way. The Crown has resisted everything from Tana's innocence to his compensation claim and now to the inflation adjustment. And so much of that was unnecessary. And so I'm relieved and pleased for Tana. I'm thrilled and very grateful to Jonathan, Jared and Ingrid. But, you know, I'm also a little bit bitter that we've had to fight every step of the way. It's been unnecessary.
And in the context of what Jonathan was saying about the recommendation from Justice Hanson, it felt churlish, didn't it, not going with the inflation recommendation, which was actually explicitly advanced as the right thing to do.
That's right, and I've got, you know, I guess over the years I've formed some views about why Tana's been treated the way he's been treated.
And what are those views?
Well, I suspect a poor brown kid from South Auckland is easy to dismiss, and that's what's happened to him for nearly a quarter of a century. And so that's why I'm so proud of the legal team and the fight they've put up for him, because he was one of those powerless people in society, and he's been given his power and his mana back.
How is he? Because life is tough for Tana, isn't it?
It's still tough. He struggles every day, and you know, he's got challenges, and we try and keep him away from the spotlight to some extent, because life's not easy for him, and he doesn't really know how to live in the outside world.
Jonathan Krebs, what happens now? Because this is really interesting as a much broader precedent than simply looking at inflation, isn't it?
The result of the case for Tana is simply that the Cabinet must now go back and look at it again. Speaking more broadly, however, from an administrative law point of view, this is really quite an enormous decision, because what it says is that decisions of Cabinet can be reviewed when Cabinet's making decisions against a set of guidelines or criteria, as they were doing here. And so a previous authority that says that the High Court can't interfere with what Cabinet's decided have been overturned.
Yes, extraordinary.
And it's new. It's a new world as far as challenging what Cabinet...
It's new and big.
And very big, yeah.
How are you both feeling now? Because this is it, really, isn't it? This is the end of it. I mean, surely Cabinet are going to act on the recommendation of Justice Ellis.
Well, I hope it doesn't go to Cabinet, John, to be honest. I mean, on one analysis, it's so abundantly clear. Her Honour's decision combined with Rodney Hanson's report together, I mean, it's a no-brainer. The Minister, if she wanted to, in our view, can have
a media conference tomorrow
and say, well, we'll pay.
Yeah. I guess she has to talk to Cabinet now, but you would expect you'd expect to see that next week.
She's a fair woman. Let's hope she does.
Okay, nice pitch to her. Tim McKinnell, last word to you. When did you first sit there and think, holy moly, this guy isn't the man? When was that?
Late 2008, so nine years ago.
It's been a long 9 years, and you were a voice in the wilderness for a long time, weren't you?
Yeah, Jonathan and I in particular, but it was a long time before anybody was really listening, but most people are now.
And you must feel, and I know that you don't deal in pride, but you must feel proud of what you have achieved together, you, men and Ingrid.
Yeah, we are.
It is, yeah. It's a great feeling to actually have succeeded and brought this this terrible case of injustice through to a case of justice.
Tim McKinnell, do you want to say something? You're buggered, aren't you?
Yeah, I am, and that's, you know, part of that frustration's bubbling over now. I just want this to be over, properly over, for Tana, and then we can start talking about what happens.
And the right thing to be done.
Exactly.
Tim McKinnell and Jonathan Krebs, thank you so much for joining us live beside me with our magnificent wooden desk.
It's a beautiful desk too. Thank you very much for having us, and thank you for your interest in this throughout.
It's always been a privilege to work with men of great ethics and decency. Thank you both. Very kind. Right, let's move on. Bill English is adamant his ministers were not responsible for leaking information about the New Zealand First Leader Winston Peters' superannuation overpayment. A furious Mr Peters has accused National Party ministers of character assassination and underhanded behaviour after finding out a handful of senior National Party figures were briefed about his situation. 3 government investigations have now been launched into the leak. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
2 government ministers and the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, Wayne Eagleson, were briefed by government officials about Mr Peters' pension overpayment, which he's now repaid. However, Bill English says he's personally been assured by them they were not the source of the leak. The Social Development Ministry and IRD have launched internal investigations. Mr English says Ministerial Services is also looking into it.
At how information was handled in ministerial offices. I mean, we would take a production of private information into the public arena very seriously. And that's why there's an investigation by State Services Commission and MSD, who I understand are following their normal policy.
Winston Peters says that changes nothing.
Well, they can all cover their bum as hard as they can like, but frankly, it's rotten, it's bad, and we're not going to have an in-house inquiry sorting out what should never have happened in the first place by looking into their own misrepresentations or misactions.
The State Services Commissioner Peter Hughes says the no surprises policy allows ministers to be made aware of significant issues, but they must not become involved in operational matters. The Social Development Minister Anne Tolley and State Services Minister Paula Bennett were the 2 ministers briefed under that policy. Mr Peters says there's no reason the commissioners or the ministers should have had the information.
It's clear now that there were people who knew things that I didn't even know about my case. So this is not right. An innocent mistake was made, and they've done their best to character assassinate me, and I think that's disgusting.
Mr English acknowledges it would have been better if ministers weren't briefed about it, but he says regardless, both ministers acted with integrity.
Our ministers were put in the position where they were given information about the set of circumstances around Mr Peters. They didn't ask for it, they weren't looking for it. They were given some information and they handled it appropriately because, by not telling anyone, including me, because it was personal to an individual who was collecting superannuation.
The Labour leader Jacinda Ardern says the no surprises policy should be reviewed.
I think we probably need some quite clear criteria around when that is used, but you would hope that even then, even if they thought that that was justified, that has to be kept highly confidential. I mean, government departments hold a lot of information about, well, all New Zealanders, including members of Parliament, and you'd hope that that would be treated with discretion.
Meanwhile, Mr Peters was asked to explain how he ended up owing money after receiving the single person's pension rate.
I wish I could. I spent a long conversation with MSD on that very question, and we couldn't come to a conclusion on it. But, you know, it happens thousands and thousands and thousands of times. Now, I'm not going to be standing by whilst reporters try and malign me on the fact that I didn't need the money or I was so careless or I should have known.
He says even MSD couldn't figure out how it happened.
When they said to me, it appears you've been overpaid, we want to discuss that with you, I went and had a discussion. We tried to work out how that was possible, couldn't get it resolved, and then my only concern was, well, please tell me, I don't know what its componentry is, just please tell me what the figure is so I can get rid of it.
Mr Peters says he's taking legal advice before deciding what further action to take in response to the leak. For Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
The New Zealand First candidate, Shane Jones, is delighted that he's been ranked number 8 on the party list, saying he was always utterly confident his quality would shine through. The party's list was unveiled today, just 3.5 weeks out from the election. Reporter Benedict Collins has more.
Winston Peters says the list is a comprehensive evaluation of New Zealand First's candidates and its sitting MPs. He says the 8th placing of Shane Jones, who's contesting the Whangarei electorate, sends a message.
Well, I think it's a tremendous place for Shane Jones to be. It's a sign of confidence that we've got some serious talent here, and given the longevity of other members in the party, that is a very excellent position to be in.
Shane Jones was stoked.
And I love the number 8. It's Chinese for good luck.
Did you think you'd be a bit higher up the list though?
Look, I never ever once lobbied either Winston. I never contacted a single board member about the rankings. I was just utterly confident that I'm a performer and quality would shine through.
The party's controversial MP, Richard Prosser, tumbled down the list from 3 at the last election to number 15. Last week, Mr Prosser hit the headlines after he told a business conference that New Zealand First would renationalise the energy industry by buying companies' shares back at their original price, and was in turn labelled an effing idiot by the ACT Party. Mr Peters made reference to those comments in a speech to the forestry sector in Whangarei today.
We know that you put a lot of money into it. We know your investors entitled to a fair go. We're not going to come in and nationalise you, I can guarantee you that, contrary to what one of my colleagues said. He got a kick in the you-know-where for being careless with his words.
Other non-MPs to be highly ranked are Lawrence sheep and beef farmer Mark Patterson, who's at 7, and former broadcaster Jenny Marcroft at 9. In Whangarei for Checkpoint, Benedict Collins.
The convicted double murderer David Tamihere was back at the High Court in Auckland today to give evidence against a secret witness from his trial. Witness C, whose identity is suppressed, was a Crown witness at Tamihere's trial and told the court Tamihere made a number of admissions to him while the pair were in prison. He later recanted the evidence and is now charged with 8 counts of perjury and 1 of attempting to pervert the course of justice. Edward Gay filed this report.
Witness C's evidence was part of the Crown's case that resulted in David Tamihere being convicted in 1990 of murdering Swedish tourists Heidi Pakkanen and Sven Urban Hoglan. But Tamihere told prosecutor Murray Gibson today he didn't discuss his case in any great detail while inside prison because he didn't trust his fellow inmates. He was asked how prisoners felt about secret witnesses.
Oh, no one likes them. They're pretty dangerous sort of a crew.
Why?
There's no defence against them. They'll stand up and say, he said this, he said that. And all you can do is say no. Well, you know, I didn't.
Witness C told Tamihere's trial that Tamihere had confessed to sexually assaulting and killing the tourists. Tamihere became emotional as he told the court the allegations.
And then I used an aluminium boat I was supposed to have stolen and dumped them somewhere at sea out off the Coromandel coast. Then came back, did another 2 or 3 days of sexually assaulting the girl. And that sort of stuff, and that I'd given a watch as one of the Swedes' watches to my son.
Tamihere said everything Witness C told the court, apart from his name and that the pair were locked up together, was a lie. He said 17 years after the trial he got a letter from Witness C while still inside prison. He summed it up like this.
That the police had put him up to it, and it was told him what to say, and it was all lies, and he was sorry about it.
Under cross-examination from Witness C's lawyer Adam Simpringham, Tamihere confirmed he'd given misinformation to fellow inmates to see who was talking to the police. But he said he never gave out any important information. He also confirmed there were 2 other secret witnesses, but neither of them had been charged with perjury. Mr Simpringham asked whether the identity of Witness C would have been known inside prison and whether Witness C was in danger.
Narcs and snitches, they're not well liked within prisons, are they?
No, they're a little bit lower than child molesters.
Yep. And child molesters get beaten up, don't they?
Well, not as much as you'd hope.
He said after Witness C recanted his evidence, he later claimed to have done so because of threats from gang members.
Well, I went to all the heads of the different gangs and put the hard word on them about it. And none of them said they didn't do it. They didn't know what I was talking about.
Well, tell us about that. How did you put the hard word on gang members?
Well, all the heads of the gangs, or the national heads of them, not just the chapter heads, were in Parental at the time. And we got together with them and said, and which one of you bastards is doing this? Oh, sorry. And they were so back and says, look, it wasn't one of our crew.
Tamihere confirmed he'd lied to the police and others, but said it was Witness C who was lying in this trial. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi ko Edward Gay aho.
Lots of feedback coming in tonight. Thank you. One subject that you are really expressing opinions on is Taina Porter. How outrageous that National considered it acceptable to pay such a large amount to Taina Porter for a complete travesty of justice, thereby further victimising an extremely vulnerable person. Great news that his legal team continued to fight for justice for him and that he has won an inflation-adjusted payment. Now, that is the feedback. He has won it in theory, but Cabinet or the Minister has to sign off on it. So we went to Amy Adams and asked her if she'd front on Checkpoint tonight. She wasn't available to. She has issued a statement. The decision has been reviewed. The judge has declared that the judge has declared that the guidelines do not prevent inflation adjustment, which is consistent with my understanding of the guidelines, and has invited Cabinet to consider whether the interest of justice requires such an adjustment in Mr. Porter's case. I will be taking time to consider the detailed judgment, and further public comment on the case would be inappropriate at this stage. So that is from Amy Adams. You would have heard Jonathan Krebs, if you were listening, saying actually all she has to do is get sign-off from Cabinet and announce herself sometime next week perhaps that Taina Porter will get the inflation-adjusted amount. The original sum was $100,000 for every year he'd been in jail, but that was set in 1994, and 100 grand then was very much more than 100 grand now. More feedback coming up after the news. Thank you for it.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. Taina Porter's lawyer says a court judgment shows Cabinet got it wrong when it decided not to adjust his compensation for inflation. Mr. Porter was 19 years old in 1994 when he was convicted for a rape and murder he didn't commit, and 40 years old when his convictions were quashed by the Privy Council in 2015. His lawyer, Jonathan Krebs, said the guidelines for compensation permit an adjustment for inflation, and a High Court judgment has confirmed that. Mr. Porter's supporter, former police officer and private investigator Tim McKinnell, said they plan to talk to Mr. Porter about the ruling tonight.
He'll be blown away. I mean, he's been incredibly patient. He's far more patient than what we are, but it will mean the world to him.
An assessment commissioned by Mr. Porter's legal team suggests he should receive an extra $500,000 to $600,000 on top of the $2.5 million of compensation paid out last year. The New Zealand First leader Winston Peters is accusing National Party ministers of character assassination after details of his superannuation overpayment were made public. The government ministers, who were briefed by officials, deny making it public. Mr. Peters says he still doesn't know how the overpayment occurred.
When they said to me, it appears you've been overpaid, we want to discuss that with you, I went and had a discussion. We tried to work out how that was possible, couldn't get it resolved. And then my only concern was, well, please tell me, I don't know what his componentry is, just please tell me what the figure is so I can get rid of it.
Winston Peters says he was taking legal advice before deciding what further action to take in response to the leak. The Prime Minister, Bill English, is adamant his ministers didn't leak information about the superannuation overpayment. The United Nations has recommended the New Zealand government establish an independent commission of inquiry into the abuse of children and adults with disabilities while in state care from 1950 to 1990. The UN Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination says it was alarmed by the reports of alleged abuse of children in foster care or state institutions. Te Manu Korahi reporter Shannon Haunui-Thompson has more.
The UN committee also said it was concerned Māori children are still more likely to be placed in state care, and the parliamentary proposal to send young offenders to military-style boot camps. It has acknowledged the government's intention to compensate victims, but says this approach fails to expose the systemic problems that may have existed. The UN also suggests steps need to be taken to reduce the number of Māori and Pasifika children in state care through effective and comprehensive application of the Whānau First policy. Ko Shannon Haunui-Thompson, aho.
The National Party leader Bill English says there's no such thing as a free tertiary policy. The Labour Party has pledged to boost student allowances by $50 a week and bring forward the introduction of 3 years free post-secondary education. Mr. English says the multi-billion-dollar cost of the policy will be carried by the taxpayer.
They want to tax truck drivers more so that we can have more lawyers. I mean, there's no such thing as free tertiary policy. If they want to if they want to have a big spend on students, that's coming out of the pockets of the process workers that I met with this morning at King Salmon.
Bill English says students with the highest housing costs will get a $20 a week boost through the accommodation benefit from April next year. Labour MP Sue Moroney says Nationals' plan to extend paid parental leave to 22 weeks over the next 2 years is too little, too late. The new package announced by Bill English and Nelson today will extend paid parental leave from 18 weeks to 20 weeks in July next year and 22 weeks the following year. Last year, while serving as Finance Minister, Bill English vetoed proposed Labour changes to extend paid parental leave from 18 to 26 weeks. Ms Moroney says it's a sign National has run out of ideas.
They used all of their might and power in Parliament to stop parents from getting this entitlement and used never before used financial veto on an entire bill to deny parents this measure that would have been in place already.
A Labour MP, Sue Moroney. Nationals' package is expected to cost $88 million a year once it's fully implemented in 2 years. Officials in Houston, Texas are warning as many as 500,000 people may have to be evacuated, with the river which flows through the city's southwest poised to break its banks in the next few hours. Floodwaters caused by unprecedented rain from Tropical Storm Harvey are continuing to rise. More than 30,000 residents are now temporarily homeless, while thousands of others remain stranded in flooded homes. Major Chad Norville from the Fort Bend County Sheriff's Office says officials are struggling with the numbers needing rescue.
First responders can't do everything. We are overwhelmed. It's a huge-scale operation, and we are relying on neighbors with boats and neighbors with extra room, and they're helping out their neighbors, and they're coming out, and whether it's rescuing them with a boat or they're providing them an extra room.
The storm is regaining strength, and forecasters warn it could hit Houston again, along with New Orleans, which has closed schools and city facilities. It's coming up to 6:06. The sport, New Zealand's hopes of winning the netball quad series have suffered a telling blow, with Vice-Captain Maria Tutaia to miss their 2 remaining tests. The 30-year-old goal attack has been released by the Silver Ferns on bereavement leave. The Silver Ferns play England in Auckland tomorrow night and Australia in Invercargill on Sunday. New Zealand Cricket expects more players to follow Black Caps Mitch McClenahan's lead and opt out of the national contracts in pursuit of T20 riches. The left-arm pace bowler's been released from his New Zealand Cricket contract so he can be considered for a new T20 competition in South Africa and the Big Bash League in Australia. New Zealand Cricket's high-performance manager Brian Stronach says the situation highlights the changing cricket landscape.
Mitch could be the start of something. We cannot compete from a money point of view around how much we pay these guys. Some of the money that they're being offered is definitely up there. So no, it's definitely not. We're not going to go toe for toe.
McClenaghan's place on the contracted players list will be taken by Auckland's Lockie Ferguson. Maria Sharapova proved she's a force to be reckoned with at the US Tennis Open after outlasting second seed Simona Halep in the opening round in New York. Still shaking off the rust from a 15-month doping ban and playing in a jet black dress that sparkled with crystals, Sharapova says she's learnt a lot about herself and coming back from the suspension.
Behind all these Swarovski crystals and little black dresses, this girl has a lot of grit and she's not going anywhere.
Maria Sharapova. That's the news.
Kia ora, I'm Melody Thomas with a podcast series called Bang, exploring sex and relationships over a lifetime. Tomorrow we explore some of the ways parenthood affects intimacy.
There was just milk everywhere I was just like, I am so gross right now.
Plus a truly modern conception tale.
We had a guy come up to us in the supermarket just going, if you ever need some sperm, come and see me.
Bang. After the 8 o'clock news tomorrow during nights on RNZ National, as well as on iTunes and the podcast page at rnz.co.nz.
Met surface weather through to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland and Coromandel Peninsula. Mainly fine today, rain tomorrow with heavy falls and possible thunderstorms, easing to a few showers from afternoon. Waikato to Taranaki, including Bay of Plenty and Taupō. Cloudy periods with a few afternoon showers today. Cloudy with occasional rain or drizzle tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa fine today, but cloudy tomorrow with occasional drizzle. Whanganui to Wellington, including Taihape, cloudy at times with the odd light shower, drizzle developing tonight in Wellington and scattered light rain elsewhere from tomorrow evening. Nelson and Buller fine spells with a few showers from tomorrow afternoon. Westland, Fiordland and Southland, cloudy periods with isolated showers clearing this afternoon and becoming fine. Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago, fine at first but becoming cloudy with occasional drizzle developing this evening. And for the Chatham Islands, cloudy with periods of rain from this afternoon. It's 6:09 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten. Lots of lovely feedback coming in tonight. Thank you very much. One of the things that you are really incensed about is that the Black Ferns, who had just won the Rugby World Cup, flew home cattle class, or economy, as it is called by the airlines. Hi, John. Surely Steve Tew has a bob or two more he could spend on the fabulous Black Ferns. It's shocking to hear of the disparity we allow between our female sports stars compared to males, says Caroline. New Zealand Rugby should have paid accommodation, first-class travel and a daily per diem. It's like the dark ages. I should say that while they were in Ireland, they were getting paid accommodation and a daily per diem. You're quite right. They were travelling in the cheapest seats that I think that they could be purchased. And it really does seem extraordinary. Super Rugby teams travel up the front, but the Black Ferns travel home down the back, and lots of you are very irritated about that. Winston Peters is still polarising people. Lots of you think actually this reeks of dirty politics, but some of you are still wondering how he didn't know he was on a single person's allowance, including Adrian. Winston Peters has to have ignored about 6 letters that arrive each year from National Super asking if his details, including if he still lives alone, are correct. An initial error in 2010 is understandable, but nobody is asking why he said a number of times that he lived alone by ignoring this letter. Ignoring the letter is saying once a year that, yes, I live alone, I do not have a partner. How does Winston explain this? Boy, oh boy, that is a story that is polarising you in your take on it. Thank you for your feedback. You can text us 2101 or email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. Students say a $50 a week boost for student allowances could be the difference between living in a cold and damp flat or a warm and dry one. Labor today announced its tertiary education policy, which includes boosting allowances and the amount that can be borrowed for living costs, removing the 7-year limit on postgraduate borrowing and bringing forward the first year of free tertiary study to 2018. That was an existing policy. It's just been advanced. As Michael Kropp reports, students say the policy will help remove some of the stress from studying.
Labour's leader Jacinda Ardern says because higher education is a public good, it's important that anyone, regardless of their background, can access a tertiary education.
30% of our school leavers right now are going on to tertiary education. We've actually had higher rates than we have right now. We know cost is a barrier for all New Zealanders. We want to make sure that no matter what workplace you're in, no matter what your parents are doing, they actually do something about those fees for everyone.
At the moment, the student allowance is about $170 a week, with up to $40 extra for accommodation costs. At Victoria University's Kelburn campus, students say that barely covers the rent for a dodgy flat, and a boost is sorely needed.
It'll make a huge substantive difference because at the moment my student allowance and loan covers my rent and I live in a shithole, really. Like, it's a really awful place, but that's why the rent's so cheap. So with an extra $50 I could live further away and bus in.
Any sort of allowance is helpful. Being completely independent myself and flatting in Wellington is extremely expensive, and having to juggle that with work I think is it's a big task for anyone, and I think I'm quite privileged in the fact that I have a job and that I have access to the allowance, but I know a lot of people don't have that.
It would be great for transport. I am living on what I get already with the student living costs, but it would give me a bit more freedom and I suppose remove some stress from studying.
The Union of Students Association's President Jonathan G is welcoming the announcement. He says tertiary education should be a right for all, not a privilege for those who can afford it.
What we're seeing is actually students are engaged in part-time work, but a lot of them also are engaged in full-time work on top of their full-time study. So they focus much more on economic survival rather than academic success, which obviously defeats the purpose of them going into tertiary study in the first place.
Mr G says the policy's a good start, but more will be needed to bring down student debt. Last year, the Child Poverty Action Group released a report showing half of all students were in financial distress, and that situation was severe for 1 in 6 who couldn't afford shelter or food. The group's economic spokesperson, Susan St John, says there's much to applaud in Labour's policy.
We have a situation where students are having to go to food banks, that they can't complete their studies because they simply don't have enough for the basics. So it is a dire situation. It's good to see Labour is doing something, but it's just starting the reforms that are actually needed.
Associate Professor St John says those reforms must include lifting the parental income and repayment thresholds, a debt forgiveness program, and students' inability to access the Working for Families program. For Checkpoint, Michael Kropp.
Busy day on the campaign trail. National says it will extend paid parental leave to 22 weeks if it wins the election because it can now afford to do that. Under a package announced by National leader Bill English today, paid parental leave will be extended from 18 weeks to 20 weeks in July next year and 22 weeks in 2019. Last year, while he was Finance Minister, Bill English vetoed proposed Labour changes to extend paid parental leave from 18 to 26 weeks. Here's how he explained his change of heart today.
Well, at the time, that was a large unbudgeted expenditure, but we said then that we would extend paid parental leave when we're able to. We're doing that in the context of a range of support for families, so tens of thousands of low-income families will now have access to free GP visits because of our announcement a few weeks ago. The family incomes package lifts the child payments to $101 for the first child and $90 for the subsequent children. It's an increase of $18, $25 in a lot of cases. And there's also further assistance, particularly for those low-income families with the highest housing costs, some of whom will be up to $100 a week better off. So this further extension of paid parental leave is in the context of a number of other priorities that we've seen for relieving pressure on families.
So that's Bill English speaking on the campaign trail as he announced that policy. Labour's MP Sue Moroney says, well, it's too little too late.
Just last year, they used all of their might and power in Parliament to stop parents from getting this entitlement. And that is despite the fact that there was a majority support in our Parliament. So they undermined our democracy and used never-before-used financial veto on an entire bill to deny parents this measure that would have been in place already if the National Party and Bill English in particular hadn't moved to stop it.
Sue Moroney. It is 16 minutes past 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ. Thank you for being with us. Tropical storm Harvey is poised for a second hit on the flood-stricken city of Houston. The centre of the storm, which hit Texas as Hurricane Harvey at the weekend, is now back over the Gulf of Mexico and is gaining strength. It is rebuilding. It looks ready for another crack. It's already brought unprecedented rain through some areas, and forecasters say there's much more to come over the next 3 days. Floodwaters are still rising. Residents say they don't know where else the water can go. More than 30,000 people are now temporarily homeless. Thousands of others remain stranded in their flooded homes. The damage is immense. Rescues are the top priority. Of course, CNN's Brian Todd has been out on the flooded streets watching the rescue operation in action.
Floodwaters are still rising in Houston and its suburbs, making rescues an urgent priority. In house after house, stranded residents signaling for help. Marilyn Rice and her daughter Lisa said overnight the waters in their house rose and rose.
Everything started floating, and we picked up what we could to try to save it, but it didn't do no good because the water just took over everything.
They were up all night and were huddled on the hood of their car until they were rescued by Good Samaritans.
I thank God for these gentlemen.
Another resident, Beverly Johnson, was waiting on her car since last night when it was too dark for rescue teams to see.
The rescuer leading this team, Seth Roberts, says he came to this neighborhood last night and tried to find people, tried to get people out of their homes. He said it got pitch black. He couldn't find anyone to rescue because he just couldn't see anything. These people have been waiting on their cars since last night, and Seth and his team finally got to them.
Flood rescues are the top priority now in Texas as rain from Hurricane Harvey continues to pour down. Houston's mayor says more than 2,100 people have been rescued from high water, some even by Coast Guard helicopter. But countless more have been saved by private individuals, which the head of FEMA said could make all the difference.
We need the whole community, not only the federal government forces, but this is a whole community effort from all levels of government, and it's going to require the citizens getting involved.
Private individuals have stepped up using jet skis, paddles, even canoes. Rescued families carrying what little they can with their most precious valuables in plastic bags.
How much water is in your house? About 7 feet, maybe?
Flooding will only worsen in the coming days. Forecasters say about 25 inches more rain could fall, in addition to about 25 inches that has already come down.
We're going to have to leave because it's just too much water.
Overnight, authorities made an excruciating choice, intentionally releasing water from 2 dams in West Houston because they're so full.
If they don't do it, let's say they hold back the water and it builds up, and then it will be forced, it will go around addicts, and the situation would be exponentially worse.
But that means even more floodwaters will hit neighborhoods downstream.
Gotta go. The water's coming up really fast.
Residents downstream forced to evacuate, even though their streets are not flooded yet.
They're giving us till no time. It's already up, so we're out.
A Houston resident ending that report from CNN's Brian Todd. Meanwhile, the governor of Texas has authorised the deployment of all 12,000 members of the State National Guard. And the President, Donald Trump, expects federal emergency funding to help the flood-ravaged city to be approved within days. Home again, 6:19. Residents who live near a large boarding hostel in central Nelson are worried they can't find out more about former prisoners who are living there, a significant proportion of whom go on to commit other crimes. Reportedly, the 190-room low-budget Franklin Village is located within 700 metres of 4 preschools and 5 schools. Figures obtained by a nearby homeowner under the Official Information Act show almost 400 offenders have lived there since 2009 and up to 80 in a year. One neighbour says it's become a mini prison without security. But the police say they monitor the premises closely and that it houses people who might otherwise be in a shelter or on the street. Here's our Nelson reporter, Tracy Neal, with this story.
The multi-level hostel opposite Nelson Hospital was once a nurse's home. After a plan more than 10 years ago to turn it into visitor accommodation failed, a Christchurch businesswoman took it on, revamped it, and Franklin Village opened in 2009. Liz Harris says she aimed for the affordable accommodation market and it soon began filling up.
The first days that I arrived here, there were people, the word had got around that I bought the place, and I had actual people sitting outside on my lawn hoping that I would take them in straight away. So we opened the first part, Barton Hall, and then we opened the ensuite.
Franklin Village, which offers short-term accommodation from $140 a week for a room to $320 a week for an apartment, is now full at about 300 people, and there's a waiting list. A local homeowner who doesn't want to be identified for security reasons says Official Information Act figures show that the Corrections Department are using it to house former offenders. For the first 3 months of this year, there were 22 living there at a time. The homeowner says she was surprised and concerned to learn that more than a third of the total number of former offenders were caught reoffending while living at Franklin Village. She says in a statement it's troubling that corrections can't reveal what the offences were.
I was hoping they could assure me that they were not allowing significant numbers of medium to high-risk offenders to live in a residential area among children, elderly people and families, and next to schools and kindies. They did not do that.
Corrections told her it could not reveal the information for privacy reasons, but in a statement said it had a robust checking and follow-up program.
The department has comprehensive offender management plans in place for each individual in its care, and community corrections staff regularly meet with offenders to assist in their ongoing rehabilitation and reintegration.
Another nearby homeowner, Dominic Allport, says locals just want to know more about their neighbours. Franklin Village manager James Campion says they have a stringent tenant vetting process which includes close contact with corrections and the police. He doesn't believe they've had any sex offenders living there.
For the 6.5 years that I've been here, I have not let any in that I am aware of.
we have an application process. Any people that have been who are returning from jail through corrections, then we ask them to write to us and to have that verified by corrections to say that that is the case.
Liz Harris says if a sex offender did lie about their crime, the police would soon know and the person would be evicted immediately. The Nelson Bays Police Prevention Manager, Scott Richardson, says Franklin Village provides an important service.
But there's a lot of people in there who are just trying to get ahead, and Franklin Village is their home. Some of the people who, if they couldn't stay there, would be in overnight shelters, or could be on the streets, and that's not ideal either.
Mr Richardson says the public can be satisfied they are safe.
There's no specific risk associated to Franklin Village just because a minority of their occupants are known to police and corrections.
Minority or not, the concerns over Franklin Village highlight the difficulties that inevitably arise when it comes to putting a roof over the heads of some of society's most at-risk and vulnerable people. In Nelson for Checkpoint, Tracy Neal.
Tracy raises an interesting issue at the end of that story. We'd love your feedback on it. You can text us 2101 or you can email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz. How do we get that balancing act right? 6:24. The Green Party's plans to create New Zealand's largest ever marine sanctuary off the Taranaki coast could put an end to a seabed mining proposal before it even gets going. The party's leader, James Shaw, says Trans-Tasman Resources' plans to mine iron sands off the seafloor was the catalyst for the sanctuary, where oil and gas exploration would also be phased out. Our Taranaki reporter, Robin Martin, was at Hawera's Waihi Beach.
About 200 school children, Ngāti Ruanui iwi members and Hawera locals formed a human chain at the announcement, symbolising their willingness to fight for the ocean. James Shaw told them seabed mining would be the equivalent of dumping the contents of a vacuum cleaner onto whales' dinner plates. He says the 300 square kilometre sanctuary, stretching from Kahurangi Point at the top of the South Island to Hawera in the north, would have a direct impact on Trans-Tasman Resources' permit to dredge 50 million tonnes of iron sands each year.
So we would aim to stop that. There are some appeals that are still yet to come, and we have to see what the outcome of those appeals is going to be. But the intention is for this proposal not to proceed. In fact, that in many ways that is the trigger for us to put in place this marine mammal sanctuary in the first place.
James Shaw says there are blue whales and 37 other marine mammals living in the area, including the endangered Maui's dolphin. But he wouldn't say if the sanctuary is a bottom line for the Green Party in any coalition negotiations. Event organiser Mama Kumaroa says the sanctuary would be a godsend.
Wonderful. I mean, the environment is the biggest classroom that we're ever going to have. We will ever have. And that's one of our strongest points in our kura that we promote. We promote the environment so big that it's their biggest classroom.
Ms Kumaroa's students couldn't agree more.
The ocean is a gift from the gods, so we have to respect it because it's been around longer than us, before the dinosaurs even, I think.
I'll hope that they'll be able to fight against the government so we can protect our seabed.
So that our ocean animals can live a happy life.
The deadline for appeals against the Environmental Protection Authority's decision to grant consents for seabed mining expires on Thursday. Ngāti Ruanui and Kiwis Against Seabed Mining have signalled they will seek to overturn it. In Hawera for Checkpoint, ko Robin Martin tēnei.
A ban on plastic bags has come into force in Kenya. From today, anyone found manufacturing, selling or even carrying a plastic bag can face a fine of $40,000 or 4 years jail. Kenya joins more than 40 other countries, including China, France, Rwanda and Italy, that have banned, partly banned or taxed single-use plastic bags. With more, here's the BBC's Ansoi from Nairobi.
Growing mounds of rubbish at a neighbourhood in Kajiado, south of Nairobi. It's a common sight across Kenya's rapidly expanding urban centres. Even cattle here have come to love browsing through the heaps of garbage, looking for kitchen leftovers, which they consume along with the plastic bags used to dispose of them.
With the time, they tie around inside the stomach, and then finally you find a cow unable to walk, or unwell, and then we just take the cow to the market.
A report by the United Nations Environment Programme found that cattle slaughtered in Nairobi's abattoirs had huge amounts of polythene bags in their guts, raising fears of plastic contamination in food. Now the government says it's determined to implement the ban to the letter. Even visitors coming into the country will be affected.
I cannot guarantee that on the 1st of September we will be able to confiscate bags at all of the airports and ports of entry, the way Rwanda has been able to do. But that is the direction in which we are moving, which is to say that to all visitors coming to Kenya, please do not bring your plastic carrier bags.
Consumers have been busy looking for alternative carriers.
I think the ban is good because, first of all, we're able to keep the environment clean. At least when someone can visit our cities, we'll be very happy. The city is clean.
I'm so excited about it because finally our environment will be clean, free of plastics. And personally, I've always been feeling like plastics are choking us. I've bought 3 baskets, one for supermarket shopping, one for fruit shopping, and one for my husband.
The plastic bag ban is in many ways taking people back to the old ways. Hand-woven traditional baskets were very common earlier on, but then were replaced by polythene bags. But now they're making a comeback. So in a way, one industry has been killed, but another one revived. Back in Kajiado, Nancy hopes that she too will now keep her tradition of cattle rearing alive and grow her herd. With time, she hopes the environment around her will become cleaner and the health of her livestock improves.
That report from the BBC's Anne Soy ending Checkpoint for tonight on behalf of our really good team. Thank you so much for being with us. We will be back tomorrow night at 5 o'clock.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. Taina Porter's lawyer says a court judgment shows the Cabinet got it wrong when it decided not to adjust his compensation for inflation. The anti-whaling group Sea Shepherd says Australia and New Zealand care more about trade deals with Japan than enforcing conservation laws, as it announces it won't fight whaling in the Southern Ocean this year. Winston Peters accuses National Party ministers of character assassination after details of his superannuation overpayment were made public. The United Nations has recommended New Zealand set up an independent commission of inquiry into the abuse of children and adults with disabilities in state care from 1950 to 1990. Labour says Nationals' plan to extend paid parental leave to 22 weeks over the next 2 years is too little, too late. And officials in Texas warn as many as 500,000 people may have to be evacuated